In this episode, we look at how after months of trade tensions, there are now signs of a reset between India and the United States. We also take a quick look at the UK, which just witnessed one of its biggest far-right rallies in years. But first, we begin with Manipur, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi made his first visit in over 2 years. Hi, I'm Ichha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Over the weekend, Prime Minister Narendra Modi made his first visit to Manipur since the ethnic conflict between the Meitei and Kuki-Zo communities broke out in May 2023. In the 27 months since, the state has seen prolonged violence and displacement, a collapse of law and order, the rise of armed groups, a Lok Sabha election, the imposition of president's rule, and more recently, a gradual ebb in violence. And so it was against this backdrop that Modi on Saturday delivered two speeches, 60 kilometers apart in areas dominated by the two communities. To break down the key highlights of this visit, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah in this segment.
Sukrita, can you tell us what had people been feeling about the Prime Minister not visiting the state for the past 27 months since the conflict began? What had been their reaction to this?
The state has been through so much in the past 27 months. And, Home Minister Ichha had visited Manipur in the first month, in May 2023 itself. But that was the only time he visited. The next time he visited was during the Lok Sabha elections, briefly for a political meeting. And the absence of Prime Minister Narendra Modi had become a larger metaphor for people in Manipur of neglect by the center of, what's going on in the state. And that's something that we heard repeatedly, especially, say, during the Lok Sabha elections last year, where we saw the BJP and its allies lose both seats, right, in Manipur. And one of the big reasons people would keep saying this is our message to the center that, we won't accept the neglect. And like I said, Prime Minister Narendra Modi not visiting the state when he is known to, travel extensively, visit different places across the country in different countries. So it was a very glaring absence. And that was not just felt by not just the opposition, not even just people affected by the conflict, but also by the state government itself, the BJP's MLAs, they could feel the pressure on them as well. So it was a glaring absence. And like I said, it had, in the minds of the people, it has taken on the form of a larger metaphor of neglect by the center and by Delhi.
And what would you say were some of the expectations that people in the region had from the Prime Minister's visit?
So, in the Manipur conflict, the Kuki-Zos have a very specific demand. Through the course of the conflict, they have been pushing for and demanding a separate administration, which to them means a complete separation from Manipur in the form of a separate union territory with its own legislature. So for them, the Prime Minister's visit, was hugely anticipated. Because for leaders, for community representatives, for them, they saw it as a chance to directly represent their demand and their political aspirations to the Prime Minister. I would say that ahead of the Prime Minister's visit, the anticipation was much higher in Kuki-Zo majority, Churachandpur, which was the first place that he visited, right, during his two-stop visit to Manipur. So, of course, there were differences between different stakeholders in the community about how they should approach the visit. Because, this is India, so any kind of government function becomes this huge celebration with singing, dancing. So several groups said that, this shouldn't be, and a general sentiment also across Churachandpur when I visited ahead of the visit, was that this shouldn't be treated as a celebration. It's a solemn occasion. And the greater aspiration of the people was to be heard, rather than perform any kind of, celebratory welcome. But despite, differences that people might have had or, concerns they might have had about, how it is that they must conduct themselves, how it is that they must, the tone that must be set for this visit, there was a deep sense of anticipation. Whereas in Imphal, which is the state capital, which is located in the Meitei majority valley, I found that there was a sort of almost indifference. There was a lot of anticipation amongst, I must say, one section of people, which were the NDA MLAs, the BJP MLAs and its allies, who have been pushing for a long time now for the restoration of a popular government, given that Manipur has been under president's rule since February this year. And, they were under the anticipation that, okay, the Prime Minister is coming. That means things are in a better situation in the state. So they were hoping and, their expectation has been that, this visit should pave the way for the restoration of a popular government. But amongst the general public, I found that there wasn't any such anticipation, though the demands that have been there by the, Meitei representatives, CSOs and MLAs has been for an NRC and of, the diametric opposite of the Kuki-Zo demand, which is of separate administration. The demand by Meitei stakeholders has been that Manipur's, in quotes, territorial integrity remain intact, that Manipur not be divided. One core expectation which was there from the, I think, different stakeholders in the valley was a roadmap for resettlement of people displaced by the conflict, as well as, a roadmap for how movement across the state can be restored.
Right, and tell us what happened when the Prime Minister visited the state. He, of course, gave two speeches, one in Churachandpur, which is dominated by the Kuki-Zomi community, and one in Imphal, which is Meitei dominated. What stood out to you in his message? What are some of the things that he focused on?
Right. So one thing is that, the Prime Minister did walk a very tight political line. When he came, he went to both Churachandpur. It is the district headquarters of the Kuki-Zo majority district, Churachandpur, and Imphal, which is the state capital located in the Meitei majority valley. And in both places, when he took to the stage, on the stage it was just him and Governor Ajay Bhalla. So there were no MLAs. Even in Kangla, which was the Imphal venue, the MLAs were in the audience, including former Chief Minister N. Biren Singh. And when he began his speeches, he began it by just addressing the governor, officials working in the state administration, and I quote, my brothers and sisters from Manipur. He didn't address the MLAs.
Right, which is something that would never happen in a government function.
Right, because there have been, serious allegations of partisanship. There's been a lot of resentment against the state government and against, the NDA MLAs as a part of this. So that was, I think, a very tight political line that he was walking. Now, in both locations, there was a very common theme to his visit. So in both locations, before he took to the stage, he interacted very briefly with some internally displaced people. And this was done privately before taking on the stage. This was not done in public view. The people who interacted with the Prime Minister were actually selected by the district administrations. So very brief interaction with them. And then, the prime thrust of the Prime Minister's visit was the inauguration of development projects worth 1,200 crores, which he did in Imphal. And in Churachandpur, he laid the foundation stones of another set of projects valued at rupees 7,300 crores. And this runs the whole gamut, right? From sports infrastructure to roads to education, a big infrastructural push. And the underlying message that he delivered in his speech was that presenting Manipur as a state of potential, especially Imphal as a city of aspirations, where the youth of the state can fulfill their aspirations, and that, in quotes, the dark shadow of violence, that these aspirations should not be clouded by this, I quote, dark shadow of violence. So there were appeals to the state's aspirational classes by saying, in the past, cities in western and southern India have developed and now it's your turn.
एक समय था जब दिल्ली से घोषणाएं होती थी और उनको यहां पहुंचते पहुंचते दशकों लग जाते थे। आज हमारा चूड़ाचांदपुर, हमारा मणिपुर भी बाकी देश के साथ विकास कर रहा है।
And one more thing that he said, we can't have even one wrong step on this path to progress. So this wrong step that he's referring to is obviously violence and conflict. And then the larger message was for harmony, and that, the hills and the valley have to move together in this, which is a direct reference to the deep divide that is there. Basically, peace is imperative for the progress that Manipur deserves. That was the core message of what he was saying. He did briefly also address the plight of displaced people in the state. And he said that the central government is putting in all efforts to ensure that, they are looked after, and that, 7,000 new houses are being built for them, and that they have, sanctions some amount of funds for their rehabilitation. So these were different things that were touched upon in his speech.
And considering that he had not visited the state all this while, and there was so much anticipation from both sides, how did people react to this message? How did they react to his visit?
So, by and large, the sense I have got from speaking to different stakeholders after the visit is that they felt that it was not enough. So, I spoke to the audience members who were there in the Imphal venue afterwards. And, what they were saying is that, we wish he would have addressed the core issues a little more, such as the movement, a roadmap for, like I said, a roadmap for the resettlement of people. From the Kuki-Zo side, obviously, like I said, their demand has been separate administration, which is actually, completely at odds with this message of, moving forward hand in hand that was there. Also, one Kuki MLA who's from the BJP, Paulian Al-Haukip, he has very clearly, said that, this is a waste of public resources because there was no opportunity for representatives to speak directly to the Prime Minister. So, he said this is all a question of optics. So, as of now, the reception has been largely critical in a sense that, people just expected a little more than messaging, I think, at this point. That seems to be the takeaway.
And, one thing that really needs to be addressed, like you mentioned, is the rehabilitation of people living in relief camps. We know that a lot of these people are living in really pitiable conditions, far away from homes. But talk about what are some of the other big things that need to be addressed right now in the state.
So I think the displaced people are obviously one of the biggest issues. The other issue that I said that what continues to divide the state completely is this ethnic and geographic divide, because of which the people are literally divided. Like it's a partition-like situation right now, and there are these buffer zones manned by security forces. Then people from one community are not permitted, even by security forces, to cross over to the other side in the apprehension that, this could be a trigger for violence or it could be provocative in any way. So that, firm divide is something that continues to persist. One thing is that the process of political dialogue between the two communities has really not taken off. So the center has been in talks with, for example, the Kuki-Zo insurgent groups, which are under the umbrella of suspension of operation agreements, which were renewed last week, right, ahead of the Prime Minister's visit. And, they are in talks with them. They have been in talks with some civil society organizations representative of Meitei interests as well. But these groups are not talking to each other right now. Security officials that I've spoken to say that, there's this fragile calm almost, given that, active violence between these two communities has not taken place since around November last year. Like, guns are not being fired. But that doesn't mean that there's peace. Because until political dialogue takes place, this could be ruptured at any point of time. That is the messaging even from security officials. So that is like a big pending issue. And like I said, this political dialogue will entail, the Kuki-Zo's demand for separate administration, as well as, the complete opposition from Meitei stakeholders to this. So that dialogue is pending. Then, of course, there's the both societies continue to be heavily armed. So there are, from time to time, search and recovery operations by the police and security forces. But the reality is that, arms continue to be available in large numbers on both sides, which again, make this calm so fragile.
Yeah, and the other thing that you've written about is the situation at the Indo-Myanmar border, which is also deeply linked to this conflict, right? Could you talk a bit about that?
So one of the prime allegations that, Meitei organizations have raised is that uncontrolled illegal immigration, they allege, from Myanmar into India by Chins, who are of the same ethnicity as the Kuki-Zos, is one of the prime, causes for volatility in the region. And, the influx of arms and drugs and so on. So there is actually a porous border, the Indo-Myanmar border. But then after this violence broke out in 2024, the center announced that it is going to fence this border, and it decided to suspend what is known as the free movement regime. So tribes living on either side of the border could travel visa-free for up to 16 kilometers and, be there for 2 weeks. So that has been scrapped. So that is now not only an issue with the Kuki-Zos, but also the Nagas, who have, Nagas live across the border in Myanmar as well. And these communities have very close ties across the border. And this manifested itself that, this is not just an issue to do with the Kuki-Zos, but also with the Nagas, because ahead of the PM's visit, the United Naga Council, which is the apex body of Manipur's Nagas, had imposed a trade embargo. So, all the major highways through which goods enter the state come through Naga districts, and they had blockaded these, demanding that these decisions be scrapped. And this is an issue that has been brewing since the centre's announcements last year. So this continues to be a controversial issue which continues to fester.
And next, we turn our attention to India-US ties. After weeks of tensions over the new tariffs, there are now signs that the two countries may finally be inching toward a thaw. Last week, US President Donald Trump said that trade talks with India are on track and predicted no difficulty in reaching an agreement. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi echoed that sentiment, calling both nations close friends and natural partners. Now in New Delhi, the exchange is being seen as a positive step forward, though with caution, especially since Washington has simultaneously urged Europe to consider steep tariffs on Indian and Chinese oil imports. Still, the fact that both leaders are now talking about partnership rather than pressure has raised hopes that negotiators can finally break the deadlock. To understand what this latest reset means for the stalled talks and what it tells us about the future of India-US ties, we speak to the Indian Express's diplomatic affairs editor, Shubhajit Roy. Shubhajit, can you tell us what does this latest exchange mean for the two countries?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, in the last couple of months, especially, the relationship between India and US had been quite damaged, disrupted. After US President Trump, he decided to impose 50% tariffs on India. 25% for what he calls the high tariffs imposed by India on the US, and 25% as penalty for buying Russian oil. So this was the sort of the highest tariff regime in the world that India had been subjected to. And India felt it was unfair, it was unjustified. And therefore, what happened was the relationship really nosedived. But in the last couple of weeks, we saw a bit of change, especially in the last week or 10 days. We saw first US President Trump saying that Prime Minister Modi is a great friend, although he did talk about the high tariffs and the Russian oil purchases by India. But he also said that, it's a good relationship that he has with Prime Minister Modi, and gave a window of opportunity for the Indian side to move towards rapprochement. And we saw what happened was Prime Minister Modi grabbed the opportunity and he posted on X from his own account, reciprocating on those warm words. So this prompt and warm response from Prime Minister Modi to President Trump really set the stage for the re-engagement or the rapprochement process to begin. And then we saw a few days later again an exchange of posts. Trump posted on Truth Social that the trade deal negotiations are underway and he's looking forward to speaking to Prime Minister Modi, to which again Prime Minister, who is not on Truth Social, but he posted on X, but tagged Donald Trump, the US President, on X, saying that, he also looks forward to working on the trade negotiations and looking forward to President Trump. So these couple of exchange of messages on social media platforms has laid the groundwork for a rapprochement or re-engagement between the two sides at the highest level.
Right, and speaking about tariffs, we know that product categories like textiles, machinery and mechanical appliances, agriculture and processed foods have already begun facing massive issues. So in that sense, this does seem like good news. In fact, last week, Sergio Gore, US envoy to India, and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio both echoed these sentiments. So could you talk about what does this new diplomatic push tell us about, how US is currently viewing its relationship with New Delhi?
Well, Sergio Gore, he is the U.S. ambassador designate. President Trump, he announced his name some weeks ago. And it's been said that he has a direct line with the U.S. president. He's been in charge of his personnel department, his director of personnel, essentially the top HR guy who's hired almost 4,000 political appointees who are in the Trump administration. So considered very close. He's very young. He's 38 and he's the youngest US ambassador to India nominated so far in the history. So in his testimony, so he has to still go through the confirmation in US Congress. So at the US Senate confirmation hearing, he appeared and made the right noises, made the right statements saying that, his priority is to work on the relationship, advance the relationship. He called it an important relationship. And he also sort of said that, he expects the President Trump to sort of has already invited Commerce and Trade Minister to the US and said that the trade deal would be negotiated in next few weeks. Also talked about the fact that President Trump would come to India at some point for the Quad Summit. So in a sense that giving the right messages, signals to Delhi, and that has sort of encouraged and has been seen by India as a very, very positive gesture, positive signal from the US administration. And the fact that this followed after these, exchange of messages between the Prime Minister and the US President gives an indication that things are on the mend. So both sides are trying to mend the ties. And I think that is what is important right now. And Sergio Gore is carrying those messages for the Indian establishment and Indian leadership.
And Shubhajit, speaking about resolving the tariff tensions, could you highlight what are the main points of contention between the two countries? And also, how close are we to a deal?
Well, what we understand is that the deal was almost done between Indian and US negotiators in August itself, but it fell through. But the US side wanted more concessions, so it has not progressed beyond where it was last agreed. So they have to now work on more items, more concessions, and that is something the two sides at the political level as well as at the negotiators level, at the technical level, they will have to work on. So first, the technical level negotiators will agree on something, and then they will have to go to the political level to get the approval on the sticking points that still remain. So I think that process is right now on. The technical negotiators, we understand, are in touch, and we'll see how it progresses in the next few weeks.
Right, and earlier you mentioned the Quad Summit, and even Gore and Rubio have emphasized this. So talk about how central is the Quad to the US-India ties today?
Well, the Quad grouping, which was almost, dead after it was first mooted in 2007. But President Trump, he revived it in 2017 in his first term. And so he gets full credit for that. And the overarching thing was that, China's assertive and belligerence in the Indo-Pacific region concerned India, US, Japan, and Australia. So these four like-minded countries came together to form the Quad. And since 2017, the meeting started. Then it was upgraded by President Biden at the leaders level when he came to power in 2020, 2021. And in the last 4 years, it only sort of, there was a lot of leaders level summits that took place. And now it is India's turn to host the leaders summit, for which the US president has to come to India end of this year. So I think both sides are now working on resolving all the issues, including the tariff issue, including the trade deal, so that the US president can come here for the Quad leaders summit. Quad remains an important element for the Indo-US bilateral relationship, also the sort of the quadrilateral relationship between India, US, Japan, and Australia, because of the strategic rivalry with China that China poses. That frames the Quad grouping, and that is something has not diminished, not gone away. So I think that sort of underlines the need for the quad grouping.
And in the end, we talk about anti-immigration protests in the UK, an issue that has become increasingly contentious across Europe. This past weekend, a rally in London led by far-right activist Tommy Robinson drew an estimated 1 to 1.5 lakh people, billed as Unite the Kingdom March for Free Speech. The event turned into anti-immigration protests and became violent when some participants clashed with police near Westminster.
This is the biggest demonstration in British history. Britain has finally awoken. We've been waiting decades. They've had everyone scared. The British public are scared no more. This is never going away. Okay? Patriotism is the future.
According to reports, the clashes left 26 police officers injured, 4 of them seriously, with injuries including broken teeth. At least 25 people were arrested for violent disorder, assault, and criminal damage. The Metropolitan Police deployed over 1,000 officers with reinforcements and riot gear to contain the violence. Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, has been a controversial figure in British politics for over a decade. He founded the English Defence League, a nationalist and anti-Islam group, and built his base through street movements and football networks. At the rally, Robinson claimed that UK politicians were adopting his positions and argued that courts were prioritizing undocumented migrants over local communities. The event also featured high-profile appearances. Elon Musk joined via video link, calling for the dissolution of parliament and an immediate change of government, while warning of massive, uncontrolled migration.
Unfortunately, if the fight comes to you, you don't have a choice. You have to fight. So you have to rally all of the people of Britain to fight.
He linked his remarks to the recent killing of US conservative activist Charlie Kirk, accusing left-wing activists of celebrating the death. Meanwhile, a smaller counter-protest organized by the Stand Up to Racism group under the banner March Against Fascism also drew around 5,000 participants. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. You can also recommend it to someone you think may like it, with a friend or in your family. This is the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast or write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.